Hi there, this is Katie Saint from Fox Valley Autism for the net training video number 4. This one is on systematic desensitization, flooding, and exposure therapy. This is super valuable when it comes to addressing fears or dislikes. So I'm going to start with exposure therapy. This is a really common thing that we do with our kiddos. They might have aversions to different situations. Some of our kiddos don't like parks. One kid that I worked with didn't like toenail polish. So these are everyday things that we want our kids to be comfortable with. A lot of our kids maybe don't like using public restrooms. And so a really effective treatment is to simply expose them to it. The repetition of being exposed to these situations reduce how afraid the kids are of them. So if they repeatedly are exposed to a public bathroom and nothing bad happens, over time they're not going to be as afraid of it. But if we protect them from that, if we never put them in situations where they're exposed to these things that they're avoiding, then that fear is just going to stay there and it's going to grow. And so we don't want that. The pattern that tends to happen when we don't address the fears is that they grow and they lead to more and more isolation. And so that is the opposite of what we want. So exposure therapy is really effective to that. So we take the child to be exposed to whatever it is that we're addressing, and then we try to make that fun. We try to make that reinforcing so it's a good experience for them so that this fear can start to go away. So the next thing I want to talk about is systematic desensitization. This is what we use when the fear is so big that just simply exposing the child to this type of situation would be too much. So, for example, one of our kiddos was afraid of dogs. And if we would have done exposure therapy with the dogs, the child would have had a complete meltdown. It would have been an extremely stressful situation that would have taken a really long time to work the child through. So instead, we did systematic desensitization. How we did that was we broke it down into steps that the child could handle. So to start with, we just had the child looking at pictures of dogs. Simply looking at pictures of dogs, naming the dogs he thought was cute versus the dogs he didn't like as much. And then we started showing him videos of dogs. We showed him friendly videos of dogs being cute, a couple of videos of dogs barking but being friendly, to try and pair that association with dogs are a good thing. So as the child got comfortable with these videos and these pictures, then we took it up a notch where we went to a dog park, but we stayed in the car and he could see the dogs in the distance, but we never got out of the car. And so once we could do that without him being uncomfortable, we rolled down the window of the car. And once he could do that and be comfortable, then we took one step out of the car. So we slowly just added one step after one step as the child got comfortable. And eventually, the child got to the point where he could interact with dogs, he could play with dogs, and he was fine. But we needed to break it down into all of those steps to get the child to the place where he could be comfortable. He needed that repetition, he needed that exposure, and the therapist had to be really intentional about protecting those exposures so that they stayed positive. Because if we're doing systematic desensitization on dogs and then a dog bites him, that is going to ruin all the work we did. So we want to be really intentional that we are protecting those spaces and making them positive so that the client can learn that their fear is not valid and they don't have to be afraid anymore and they can be comfortable. So the last thing I want to talk about is flooding. This is the least common one that we use. Flooding is a type of exposure therapy that um, is more intense, basically. So an extreme example of this would be if I'm afraid of balloons, I am going to be forced to be in a room with 100 balloons and I don't get to leave until I'm calm. So this is really a method we don't use very often, but it can be effective from the standpoint of exposure reduces anxiety. So you basically just expose the child to this thing at a high intensity and you help them cope with their anxiety until they're calm and comfortable. This is something that you would never do without your senior or lead's permission, but it is a strategy that gets used from time to time. So that is the overview on flooding, systematic desensitization, and exposure therapy. 3 really effective tools to help reduce anxiety.